With me today is Bobby Marandi. He's PwC's U.S. energy leader. We also have David Sapin, principal for PwC's Connected Solutions. I'm appreciative of you both joining us today. Our topic of discussion is centered around contact tracing in the oil and gas industry. You know, companies have been through we can say it over and over again. They've been through so much, nothing that they could have imagined. And we're going to start off by talking to you, Bobby, about, I guess, an overall view of speaking to how COVID-19 has impacted the energy industry as it relates to returning to work, all the risks associated with that as well.
This industry has been around for over a century. It's seen demand shocks and supply shocks, but we've never seen demand and supply shocks both happen at the same time to this great extent. Of course, the demand shock was a result of the rapid decrease in the economic activity to try to help manage the health crisis. And the supply shock was a result of continued production and actually a ramp up of production in the months of March and April. Of course, this industry is a key pillar of our critical infrastructure. So the industry has been working very hard to try to make sure that it meets our energy needs on a daily basis. And then we're also getting the materials and supplies that go into the production of everything we need, including PPE and hand sanitizers. Of course, for the sector, the health and safety of its employees are priority number one. And given the diversity of the sector, you can probably put the type of activities that the employees have been engaging in two broad categories. One is where the employees have to be physically present, for example, in a plant, a refinery, in the oil field, on the platform, or as part of the pipeline facilities. And the other one where in the corporate offices or regional or support functions, the work can be done remotely, but of course that has its own set of challenges. And of course, as we see the economy opening up, we're starting to see those challenges converge together. Now, what are some of those challenges? They could include anything from ensuring the health and safety of the at-risk employees or the ones that are taking care of at-risk loved ones and family members, to helping parents with childcare and meeting the educational needs of their children. And how do you leverage technology during this time? From doing video conferencing to online collaboration to managing processes, and of course, contact tracing. Now, David, I'd like to get your thoughts around contact tracing.
We can talk about this. I mean, we at PwC, obviously, as every industry is dealing with the situations of the safety of their employees, both looking at them outside of the workplace as they're returning, and then particularly in the energy industry where you have people who are continuing to work today. And I think it is a balancing act, right, of identifying the best ways to ensure social distancing, and we can get into contact tracing in a minute. Jessica, I know you have several questions on that. And then there's this balance of that, so ensuring the safety, but also managing privacy concerns and considerations of the workforce. So there's people are getting used to this new work environment, but I think that the first and foremost is the safety component.
Very big information there. You know, we hear about safety, but being able to implement it is so important. How do you think companies can leverage existing contact tracing capabilities, maybe of mobile devices or any other type of technology to really enable that workforce safety?
Yeah, I mean, Jessica, I think what we've seen, I think there's two elements of this, right? So I think one of the things that we've looked at is sort of an app-based contact tracing. So that's something where you would download an app on your phone as you enter the workplace. It's monitoring proximity disclosure between individuals. So that, like you said, as Bobby was saying before, whether that's in an office setting or whether that's outside in the workforce on a team, wherever that may be, in a plant. But that's something that can work. Well, once again, the key thing there is, so the safety component of that is there's this balancing act, because the feedback you get from people is, great, so I've got this app on my phone and it's there to provide contact tracing, but do they know where I am? Are they tracking where I am? Do they know how long I'm working? Is this being used for productivity? And I think what we see is very critical here is that you have to communicate this properly, which is contact tracing is critical. Bobby talked about safety of families, et cetera. You were talking about earlier, like everybody has their little ones around. The only time the contact tracing is going to be used in that situation where somebody has re-entered that workplace and they have COVID. And what we're seeing with the big companies and with all companies, you want to be able to respond quickly. And the way that you can do that, if you can do it manual, you can do a manual contact tracing process, but it's going to take more time. What we've seen the hugest benefit of automated contact tracing is you have a live incident, you run a contact trace, you can immediately tell everybody, okay, you all need to go home, you need to get out of the office, and then you can triage afterwards in terms of how you're going to manage when you're going to let people come back in.
And I think maybe that transitions into a little bit of the answer of my next question. Some ways maybe companies can enable more precise identification of who's at risk, potential areas, like you mentioned, that maybe need to be quarantined or locked down, compartmentalize it, I guess, if you will. Is that possible?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things. So there's the human to human contact. So we'll talk about, so like if we're all together, there's the concern about proximity with individuals, but then you do also have infected spaces. So one of the other things is you're seeing a lot of technology solutions, including a solution that we've developed, that can also identify when there's an infected space. So that, because there's, once again, the same protocol, so you want to make sure that you get your people out, and what you're going to do once you've gotten the people out is you want to make sure that you're cleaning the areas where there's been the infection, so you want to focus in on that infected space and take care of that. One other point, I think it's really important to note here, there's so much discussion and contact tracing. One of the reasons why I'm sure that you're talking with us, a lot of news in the press. I want to draw the distinction between what you're reading about with some of the more societal focused contact tracing apps where, Jessica, if you come in contact with someone who has COVID, you would get a notification on your phone, but nobody else would get that notification. That's great from a privacy perspective. Mm-hmm. But when you're thinking about an employer-employee setting, the employer needs to know when people have come in contact with someone else. So you have to think about privacy, because it is going to be that, the employer now knows who's been in contact with someone. But I think it's very important to draw that distinction, because out in the public, the consumer, different issues. When you have an employer-employee setting, I think there is more of a need for the employer to know who those individuals who've come in contact with, so that they can ensure their safety.
Are there any tools out there, I guess, to further help track employees' exposure to coronavirus? You mentioned, of course, the difference, with being out in the public versus being in your office. There is that privacy, I don't want to call it issue, but, point that we all have to be aware of. But this can be very sensitive as well and important. Yeah.
Look, the way we looked at it, I think it's hugely important. And honestly, Jessica, I wouldn't call it an issue, but it's a significant concern. And all of these things, people are going to need to change their mindsets about when they return to the workplace, or how the workplace is going to change where they stay there today. So for example, some of the things that we put in place with ours is the contact tracing would only occur in the workplace. So you would geofence the workplace. So if you went out to lunch or you go home at the end of the day, there's no more tracing occurring. So that's one component. The other component is, you shouldn't be using geolocation. It's not important where the individuals are. What's important is the proximity of individuals to each other. So I think building in these types of controls, making sure that people are only using contact tracing and conducting those traces when they've had a live situation, not for any other purposes. I think these things are really important. And then also how you communicate that to people and make sure that you win them over to make sure they understand that this is to protect them and their families and their coworkers.
I think one other point here is that I think it's not only important from a geolocation, but also it's important depending on the work environment. So for example, employees in a plant may or may not be able to have their mobile devices with them. So the requirements of having a way of managing the contact tracing at a plant level may be different than in the office. So that's going to be another big important aspect that employers have to think through in terms of how do they manage the contact tracing.
David, we were talking about diversity of operations. Can you talk a little bit more about if you could highlight technology that really can help in different workforce settings? We know there may be an office setting, but there's other settings as well. So I imagine those would be treated a little differently.
Yeah, and no, hey, Jessica, that's a fantastic question, because when you think about, we've developed an app, and the app is great on the cell phone, and you can bring the cell phone into a workforce setting, but we have a lot of settings where you can't have a phone with you. And so in those settings, you're going to have to come up with a different approach. So whether you're using some sort of beacon or wearable, you can still accomplish contact tracing. It's just going to look a little bit different. So I think depending on the nature of the workplace and the nature of the workforce within that workplace, there's going to be different types of solutions depending on the individual and depending on the place where they are working.
In your opinion, what's the path forward from here? Because, some people, or a lot of people, if you will, could be nervous about technology and their place in their industry or their lives, whatever it may be. But you all are talking about developing a safety aspect that really is going to be needed forever. We have no idea, how long this is going to last, unfortunately, and it'll change us forever. But what about the path forward? If you can both kind of lend your thoughts on that. We've seen a spike in cases in some areas. Some people may be worried about that, but company and leaders really need to be able to find ways to keep their companies going and their employees.
Yeah, and that's especially important for this sector because, again, I want to highlight that this is one of the key infrastructures. This industry is a key component of the critical infrastructure. So, and it's needed, the employees are needed, and the industry is needed to try to help meet our energy needs.
Jessica, I think this is a time where we need to embrace technology, and I do think there's a lot of concerns. We talked about a lot of the privacy concerns, but I think now is a great time where, like I said, our Connected Solutions business is our IoT business, our Internet of Things business, and we're thinking about a lot of new ways where we can deploy technologies to help out in these situations. So I think as long as you're putting a thoughtful approach to the use of technologies, think about in this environment right now, we can't have long queues of people. Like, you're going to see people potentially using more facial recognition, other things to make things more efficient so you can get in and out so that you can be safer. So I think we're going to see more adoption and more embracing of technology, but I think it has to be done in a thoughtful way.
Well, and really that could provide opportunities for companies too, even in themselves, and innovation, and that could be an area of hopefully revenue or something, they could have of their own as well in different areas.
It's a differentiator. I think right now, what we're seeing, number one, from the way that you're taking care of your people. So I think that's, as Bobby said, this industry is a critical industry. It's an essential industry. We've seen other essential industries where there's been a lot of concerns about how they're managing the safety of their people. So I think if you're deploying technology properly to sort of manage your workforce, because right now what we're talking about is risk to your workforce and to your people. If you're deploying technology in a thoughtful way, it's going to be an advantage for you in the marketplace. And you're also going to be viewed as a leader in deploying technology, not only because this is about keeping your people safe, but it's also allowing you to be more efficient in terms of how you're managing your workforce and how you're executing on your overall business strategy.
Absolutely. A lot of important points. I thank you both for joining me today. A very important topic of safety. And of course, I'm sure there will be many other points that we can discuss more as the months go on as well. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica.
You're welcome.
For more Hart Energy videos, follow our social media channels.